Good evening. I wish to talk to you this evening about the state of the nation's affairs. And the picture I have to paint is not, unfortunately, a very cheerful one. The figures which are just now becoming available to us show one thing very clearly. As a community, we are living way beyond our means.
Hello and welcome to Memo to File, an Irish policy podcast produced by Luke Fahely and me, Tom O'Connor. Today we're speaking with Economist Colm McCarthy. Colm was a member of the advisory group often referred to as An Bord Snip, which the government established in the 1980s to recommend cuts in state spending. Following the financial crash in 2008, Colm chaired a similar government advisory committee commonly known as An Bord Snip Nua. On this episode, Colm discusses delivery, fiscal prudence, project assessments and much more besides.
It's just populism. It's not right-wing or left-wing. It's just a refusal to accept that there are trade-offs. And one trade-off that's that tripped us up in the past is a trade-off between today and tomorrow. Somebody said this once around the time of the second Bord Snip. He said, if you run the country as if it belongs to somebody else, eventually it will. So the government has to be able, ultimately, to say, thanks for the report, fellas. And we know you don't like our project, but we're the government and we're going to go ahead with it.
All that and more coming up on this episode of Memo to File with Colm McCarthy. Before jumping into the conversation, though, a note that we will soon be recording a Memo to File review considering the podcast episodes thus far. We would love to hear from you when preparing the episode, so please do send any thoughts, questions or critiques to us by email at memotofilepodcast@gmail.com. But now, back to the interview with Colm McCarthy. We began by considering the current approach to the selection and funding of public projects in Ireland.
We're going through a phase now where there was, for a number of years, after the last crash, the banking disaster in 2008, and then eventually the government ended up in an IMF program. And one of the responses to that was to cut the capital program, which is a traditional Irish political response to tough times. It's happened before. So there was an underinvestment in infrastructure, in transport and public housing and everything else you can think of for quite a number of years. And it's really only turned around about 2015 or so, after we had begun to exit the Troika program. So there was an infrastructure deficit built up. And I should explain that a lot of what the government spends each year on capital is kind of routine. It's not big once-off things that you do once every century. That happens occasionally, like I said, the Children's Hospital. But an awful lot of it is just keeping the road system going. The road system is a very, very big national capital asset. And you can easily spend a few £100 million every year just keeping the roads in reasonable condition. And if you don't do it, then in due course they begin to deteriorate. And they deteriorate both because of traffic and because of just weather. If you build a road, leave it alone, don't go near it, no traffic on it, in 20 years' time it won't be in very good shape. So there is a need for annual continuing expenditure on the maintenance of capital assets. So that's one element. The other element is big projects. And most of capital spending in Ireland is actually not on really big projects. There's a lot of money spent every year on new Garda stations or schools or things that cost 5 million quid or 8 or 10 million quid each. And there's lots of them done every year. The public attention tends to be devoted to the rare one-off really big projects. And it's there that I think the weaknesses have emerged, because there's rarely any experience in doing these things. The trouble with delivery is that it presupposes that you selected the projects carefully to begin with. And that worries me, because we have kind of abandoned the public spending code, which was introduced with great fanfare during the IMF program. It was introduced in its current form about 2011 or 2012, around that time. And the intention was that a central government agency would cross-check the cost-benefit studies on all these projects. And that's really a project selection fail-safe, if you like. And the intention was that the good ones would get the thumbs up and the dodgy ones would be stopped. Now, I can't recall one that was actually stopped in recent times. And that process of central government, maybe the Department of Finance or the Department of Taoiseach or Department of Public Expenditure, they're the central government departments. The process of a cross-check at central government on whatever the various departments and agencies want to spend hundreds of millions on, that process has been kind of abandoned. It's just not being done. And that worries me. I don't believe in delivery of bad projects that were not a good idea in the first place.
And does that relate to all you broke down quite clearly the different types of capital expenditure? Yeah. Would you say that emphasis on delivery has an impact on all of them equally in different ways, or in some more than others?
There's a tendency for the big once-off projects that you do once every 50 years or once a century or whatever. Our big challenge in a small country where we don't have a big construction industry, we don't have a great experience and expertise in managing these things. So the trouble is that with the small projects, like I gave an example earlier on, building schools. The Department of Education builds a few schools every year, and there is pressure at present, even though the number of kids in school has gone down. There's still old school buildings that are not great, and you hear people on radio regularly complaining that my local school or TDs in the Dáil do nothing else except complain about constituency gripes. My school in wherever it is not up to scratch. But a new school with 5 classrooms or 7 or 8, it's going to cost you 6 million quid or 4 or 8 or whatever. Plus, they do a lot of them. And it's not the first time they've ever done one of these. So, like everything else in life and in management, if you keep doing it for a long time, you get the hang of it and you get better at it. So I've never been convinced that an awful lot of money is wasted on things like building new Garda stations or building new schools or whatever. And there's some evidence of that. Unfortunately, they tend to get put through the ringer sometimes on these modest size projects and asked, why do you want to do that? Perhaps by their own parent department. And there's a lot of form filling in bureaucracy and so forth. But when the big projects come along, you get political constituencies building up behind them. I'll give you an example that most people mightn't think too much about, but at one time there was a big fad for regional airports. We must have regional airports. So we ended up with 12 airports where there had been 4. on the island of Ireland. 3 of them have no flights. The airport in Sligo is closed. The airport in Galway is closed. And the airport in Waterford they want to lengthen the runway. It has had no scheduled passenger flights since 2016, so it's closed. They didn't actually close it. The staff come in every day and get paid, but there are no flights. There's no commercial scheduled flights. There may be a few private people use it. Now, the trouble with airports is that they have to be minimum size or they just lose a fortune. And the interesting thing about the airports that were built with great fanfare, there were lavish ceremonies. The minister comes down to great pleasure to declare this airport open, and lots of guff about this will help regional development and all the rest of it. There have been no inquiries into whose bright idea it was. And if you build a hospital and there were no sick people ever turned up to use it, people would scratch their heads. But apparently airports are exempt from this. There should have been inquiries into both the Sligo and Galway airports. Whose brainwave was this? So that's an example of the kind of mistake you can make. Now, needless to say, the amounts of money wasted on airports that we didn't need was small enough in the overall scheme of things, but it's symptomatic. And the source of it is a failure to do project selection properly.
But even there, the point being taken about the need for proper evaluation. You touched on the other point earlier about how sometimes projects can get bogged down in too much bureaucracy.
Yeah.
How can the balance be struck there between having the proper evaluation and avoiding slowing things down too much?
Yeah, that's a very good question. If there is a unit of the public administration, for example, let's say the Department of Education or the Department of Justice or something like that. Let's say people trust them. People think these guys have been building schools forever and they've got the hang of it. Then rather than put them through a long, detailed, elaborate process, project by project, filling out forms and people objecting and traipsing off to An Bord Snip Nua and so on, rather than a highly centralized system for a program that might nationally have a sizable budget, but it's really a budget of familiar assignments, none of which is hugely expensive on its own, and where people have had plenty of practice. There's a lot to be said for simply saying we will allocate a capital budget to the Department of X, whatever it is, or a Quango or whatever it may be, and leave it to them. And do management by exception. If they screw up, then we'll do something horrible to them later. But don't put them through a process of form filling and compliance with environmental stuff to beat the band, and the prospect of judicial review and all that sort of thing. So there's a lot to be said for streamlining at that level. But it's perfectly clear that simply didn't work with the really big project. And it doesn't work with the really big projects because the people are unfamiliar with what they're doing.
Would it be fair to say then by having, let's say, an adequate, not even an adequate, but a really strong cost-benefit analysis structure, that would lead to avoiding those kind of bureaucratic steps that we see now at the moment, let's say in terms of planning and objections, that by having the proper analysis the first instance, it would actually speed up the process?
I don't think there should be a centralized cross-check on every project.
Okay.
and certainly not on projects that cost a few million quid. And I hear from officials in some of the departments and some people that work for advisors and consultants to government agencies that there's a lot of this form filling and box ticking and so on. A bit of an obstacle race, even for small projects, and even in areas where there's probably a good case for saying, look, we trust these guys. These guys are the department of so-and-so, or they're a quango with a remit, or a local government agency or whatever. They've done this before. This is not their first rodeo. We'll just allocate them a budget and we'll manage by exception. The difficulty is, what about if some geezer comes up with a project like Bertie Ahern to build the Bertie Bowl, which was a stadium in which there would have been no matches. There are two fine big stadiums in Dublin, in the Aviva and Croke Park. Neither of them was particularly busy. The Páirc Uí Chaoimh in Cork is a fine stadium now. So there are really three national-sized stadiums. And then Taoiseach wanted to build one out in the northwest city, and it was daft from the word go. And it wasn't stopped by a process. It was actually stopped by his coalition partners in the form of Mary Harney and Michael McDowell, who just thought, this is mad. Let's not do it. And that stopped it. But it wasn't actually stopped by process.
And
it should have been, of course.
And if the same project, let's say, or a similar project was proposed today, would the process stop it, do you think, or would it be reliant on a coalition partner or the political element stopping it?
Well, my problem is that it was, I thought, the intention when the Department of Public Expenditure was set up, the intention was that it would be automatic, that every project dreamt up by a state agency above a certain amount, and they started off by saying if it's 100 or 200 million or some amount like that, a big capital project, and by implication, one that hadn't been done before, that people don't have experience of conceiving of these projects or executing them or managing them, then this will be subject to a big cross-check at central government on the cost-benefit studies. So this lurk where the project promoter commissions the economic appraisal from usually an accountancy firm or an engineering firm or somebody who has to keep the client happy, it's iffy. And what happened once, and it must be 7 or 8 years ago now, with the National Broadband Plan, the Department of Public Expenditure objected to it. And that was the last time the central government cross-check formula was used. They promptly said, well, now, in the interest of cutting out bureaucracy, we won't have any more central government cross-checks on these evaluations done by the project promoters, which is marking your own homework. And it's been very rare over the years for an evaluation commissioned by the project promoter, which is usually a state agency or a quango or something. It's very unusual for an evaluation commissioned by the project promoter to come up with a negative verdict. Mm-hmm. So my problem really is that project selection for big projects has been kind of abandoned.
When you mentioned about those assessments, that deeper, now the full title, Department of Public Expenditure, Infrastructure, Public Service Reform and Digitalisation, but we'll refer to as deeper, its initial embodiment. In terms of the National Broadband Plan, you touched on how the government's only divergence really from a deeper assessment at that time was the National Broadband Plan. And what does that tell us about that process now, particularly in respect of that at the first time the National Broadband Plan was proposed, there was a sense that it would be 500 million, but then there was a commitment to 100% coverage, which then increased the cost significantly.
Yeah.
What was going a bit deeper on it, what does it tell us about that process?
Well, what actually happened is that Robert Watt, who was the Secretary General of DEPA at the time, he's now the Secretary General of Health, he went public and said, I do not believe the cost-benefit study commissioned by the project promoters, which gave this thing the thumbs up. I have looked at it, and presumably so had the people working for him. And he said it was inadequate, and I forgot the exact words. He was kind of polite. And he said, it's just not good enough. And we have recommended, and he went public and said, we have advised the government not to go ahead with this. Government went ahead with it because everybody in Ireland is entitled to the best possible broadband and so on. And there was another way of doing it, which might have been less costly, but there was political momentum behind it. And politicians, their instinct is not to spend public money carefully, it's to spend lots of it and as quickly as possible.
I mean, this is a common thread that's appearing through a lot of the projects we've discussed, from the airports to the National Broadband Plan to the Bertie Bowl, which was going to be Stadium Ireland in Abbottstown, which would have cost a few 800, 900 million at the time. The political element and to try, if to get away from that over politicization in a sense of the projects, does it just require a shift in perception from the voter side? Or how else could it be done?
Well, that'd be nice. But I think it requires process. The process that seemed to me to be there, where no project above a certain scale of, say, a few hundred million would be signed off until the sums had been cross-checked by somebody other than the project promoter. In other words, by maybe the Department of Finance, maybe Taoiseach's department or public expenditure department. And that's what it was kind of set up for. I mean, there was no second department 50 yards from the Department of Finance. There was a unit in the Department of Finance called the Public Expenditure Division. And I know because I worked in finance on and off, whenever things got sufficiently screwed up. And that department was kind of hived off, not physically, they're actually in the same building, but they got a fancy new title and a minister. So you now had 2 ministers out of 15 in the government who were against wasting money. The Minister of Finance and the Minister for Public Expenditure. And that was one of the objectives of doing that, so that the Minister of Finance wouldn't be 1 against 14. It's usually 1 against 13. The Taoiseach traditionally in Ireland always backs up the Minister for Finance. But the public spending code, which was revised around that time, stipulated that no project above a certain size can go ahead until it's been cross-checked centrally. And that, as I understand it, has now been abandoned in the interests of delivery. And there's no trouble delivering if you don't care whether the sums add up. The biggest project in the airport space that has been proceeded with in Ireland in recent times is the new runway at Dublin Airport. And guess what? It was planned 40 years ago. They were always going to build it, where it was eventually built. They bought the land off the farmers for not very much in the dim and distant past. And when they finally decided to go ahead and build it, they already owned the land. The land was inside the fence of the airport. So they said it was going to cost 325 million to build it. Now, runways are complicated. It's not just a great big wide road. It's more complicated than that. It's got a lot of lighting issues, drainage, very important. A lot of avionics built in and all that sort of stuff, lighting and so forth. So they said it would cost 325 million. And they built it for 325 million. And it was on time and on budget. And they never boast about this, which I find extraordinary. It was by a distance the cheapest main runway built at any airport in Europe in recent years. So some big projects do get done properly. And they're very modest out of Dublin Airport. What then happened, of course, was that the planning people decided that they can't use it. And it was actually planned because I used to do a bit of work for the old Orienta company, as it originally was back then. And I've been on the board of Dublin Airport more recently, until a few years ago. So I know a little bit about it. This is long-term planning of public infrastructure. That's how you do it. No sooner had they got it built on time and on budget, but they were told there's passenger cap and you're not allowed to. Now this is an insane way to do public investment planning. So it's not that every big project that's done in Ireland that they make a hames of it. I'm not saying that. But the whole system has become politicized, and the government apparently are going to lift the passenger cap. So I think the chaps, I'm sure they're all dead now, who went up to the farmers and bought the land off them in the 1980s, they should be given posthumous knighthoods or peerages or whatever.
That would be introducing that system here, like in the UK for peerage is a different thing entirely. It's very clear what you're saying in terms of future sort of focus and also process. And I suppose on the point of process, you were involved with the Expenditure Review Committee and then also the special group on public service numbers and expenditure programs. Yeah. Often referred to as An Bord Snip and An Bord Snip Nua. Do you think it would be beneficial to establish sort of a permanent advisory group similar to those structures?
No. I always thought that was a bad idea. The first Bord Snip was in 1988, and it takes 20 years to screw things up again. So the second one, the next screw up now must be looming. I sincerely hope not. I don't think so either. But in 1988, there were people who thought, we should make this permanent and have it again next year. I never thought that was a good idea. These are emergency things. You know, this kind of thing happens when you've either lost access to the bond market, which is what happened in 2010. And we ended up in an IMF program, the only time ever in the history of the state. The first country, along with Portugal and Greece, in Western Europe to end up bust since 1953. It was quite an achievement, and largely caused by the banks and by careless fiscal management in the years leading up to it. But I never thought that you could run an agency of that kind on a permanent basis.
Even though in the second iteration, so-called An Bord Snip Nua, you were able to identify sort of 5.3 billion euro in potential savings that it could really help government have the menu.
The two editions of An Bord Snip were a little bit different. The second one, we were we were headed into an IMF program, and we all feared that would happen. It didn't happen until 2010, and there was an atmosphere of, the banks have gone bust. Every single bank in Ireland went bust. Every one of them. It was remarkable. There have been very few bank busts around the world. There's loads and loads of banking systems go bust. It's almost the nature of the beast. Very few where every single bank went wallop. But that happened here. But the idea that you can have a permanent board snip permanently in session, that's the Department of Finance. That's what they're there for. It's a quasi-constitutional function, really. If you have 15 cabinet ministers, one of whom is supposed to be able to count, and one of whom is going to be held responsible if the government can't finance itself anymore, then you just have to have a permanent watchdog role in central government
within the structure that's already there. That makes sense. We've discussed a lot about, let's say, the process pre-project, during project, I suppose after post-project, to put it that way as well. There's that sense that we kind of touched on earlier, that there isn't a lot of effective review of what happens, even though there were provisions for it in the Public Spending Code.
Yeah. But there's been a lot of emphasis the last few years, and the government has called in some experienced business people to advise them on all of this, on project management, that once you have chosen a project and you want to do it, how do you execute and make sure that there aren't in-project cost overruns? And there have been some spectacular ones, as you know. The National Children's Hospital was originally costed at, I think, 800 million. And it's now going to be 2.2 or 3 billion. We'll see. That's unconscionable. It just shouldn't have happened. But there had been a provision, which now appears to have been forgotten, that there would be a post-project review on all major projects. And that a year after the concrete has set and the hospital is open for business and it's working away, then there will be a review and a full, detailed steer's inquiry. What happened? Whose idea was this? Why did you build it? Where you chose to build it? Did you sign the contract? Did you read the contract carefully before you signed it? Did the builders, as has been widely alleged, but I have no idea whether it's true or not, I kind of doubt it, were the builders too quick on the draw and making extra claims? There's the usual circular firing squad forms, and everybody blames everybody else. There is in the United States at federal level a system, I don't know how well it works, for what they call look-back studies. If the feds give you money for an airport somewhere or whatever it is, the feds come back when it's finished and do an investigation and publish it. And there's been some royal rows in the US over things like that. And that was meant to happen here. And it was at one stage included in a revision of the Public Spending Code, but it's not being implemented.
Yeah. The provisions are there, but it's not.
And just to go back to the Children's Hospital, the amount of money.
Some listeners will grimace, they're hearing the term Children's Hospital and Metrolink all the time. But go ahead.
Yeah. But just go back to the Children's Hospital. The amount of money that's gone astray, if that's the right way to put it, on that project would build an awful lot of primary schools. And you have to think all the time about the opportunity costs of these things. And there has been no announcement of an inquiry. Now, I know it's not finished yet, and there's litigation or threatened litigation and so on. But there really was a lot of sense in the provision, which now appears to have been abandoned, in the public spending code, that after the concrete is set and everybody's gone home, and the new facility, whatever it is, stadium or a hospital or an airport or whatever it is, it's all up and running. Then you have a look-back study along the lines of what they do at federal level in the United States, and identify the guilty men if that has to be done.
Yeah, the ex-post evaluations, I think, is the exact term. I suppose the fear that would be put forward about them is that when you find the guilty men, you're going to hang them. And do you think that's necessary, or do you think that it would be better to build into that system that there won't be a fear of people completely losing the run of themselves or losing everything over that, or do you think it's important to have that accountability?
Yeah, but the Irish system at present is that you don't hang them, and that there's been laws against homicide for 1,000 years or whatever, so you can't hang them. The Irish system is that you don't identify them. To this day, the banking inquiry was solitary in that regard. The banking inquiry was conducted by TDs and senators. They were advised by lawyers not to write a chapter on each bank because there had been legal cases about the rights and remit of Oireachtas committees and so on, so they didn't. And the result of all of that is not just that we don't know what went wrong in each bank, and it's not just that individual lending officers in banks didn't get hung. They didn't get identified. We still don't know who presided over the enormous losses in AIB. AIB lost nearly as much as Anglo, not quite, but a huge amount of money, more than the Bank of Ireland. We still don't know because the report doesn't go into it. So our problem in Ireland is not that we don't hang the guilty men, we don't identify them.
But would identifying them not lead to hanging them?
Well, what do you mean by hanging?
Well, the hanging, no, not, I mean in the abstract sense, rather than having something in Merrion Square, more so. What's the so in the case of the banking reports, for instance, and the reviews, that they sort of identified what had happened to a certain extent, what's the added value of naming and identifying the person who did it if they sort of analysed what actually happened?
Pour encouragement. It would be a terrific incentive for future decision makers not to make mistakes.
Because there'll be accountability. That deals with a lot of the stuff in relation to how to potentially avoid bad decisions being made through having the proper processes and stuff. I suppose in the case of when a bad decision is actually made, let's say, for instance, if the Bertie Bowl Stadium Ireland had started being built, it would probably have kept going. That there isn't the process to stop it, and there have been instances of that elsewhere. How can you stop a bad project once it's already started?
Well, you don't start.
But if you did,
and if you have a centralized process and you stick with it, then you weed out the egregiously bad projects. There is a democratic issue here. I've discussed this a few times with senior civil servants. You cannot, if you go to the trouble of getting elected to Dáil Éireann and you become a minister in the government, you can't really hand over decisions on great big projects like, will we do something about the Children's Hospital situation in Dublin, where there were 3 old Victorian children's hospitals, which are national, in their scope, and they weren't in good shape, and we need to do something about it. You can't just hand over decisions on things like that to some committee of flipping civil servants or economists, for God's sake. You're the government. You've got elected, and you have a majority in Dáil Éireann. It's democracy. So the government has to be able, ultimately, to say to a committee like that, or deeper, the Department of Political Expenditure, say, look, thanks for the report, fellas, and we know you don't like our project, but we're the government and we're going to go ahead with it. I think that's fair enough. It would be a huge stink, of course, as it was over the National Broadband Plan, and you'll recall that. But you have to have those stinks, and the government overruled the pointy-headed economists on that occasion, and said, thanks for your objections, but we're going to go ahead with this anyway. They have gone ahead with it anyway. The take-up is low, and they've passed far more houses than have offered to subscribe, even at subsidised rates. So it looks as if Robert Watt was right about that project. But now there won't be any look-back study into it, ex-post evaluation, and the government had its way, and they've spent the money, and the money will disappear off into the national debt, which is kept in a basement in the Department of Finance.
Locked away. This is not necessarily a laughing matter. I suppose in that instance that government has strayed from the recommendation in terms of the National Broadband Plan. Why hasn't there been the same why isn't that the case for Metrolink or the National Children's Hospital, that the same sort of political just decision making was there, that it wasn't kicked down along the way?
Yeah. Dublin is an unpropitious venue for an underground railway system. Queen Victoria, unfortunately, didn't build a suburban railway system in Dublin. We can we could get unanimous agreement, I'm sure, to blame Queen Victoria. the Dublin railways, the railways into Dublin were built from the provinces, and they didn't come into Dublin. The city of Dublin doesn't have an urban rail system. They simply had termini at places like Houston, and a lot of people don't know this, but the railway used to end at Amiens Street on the north side and at Western Row on the south side. And the loop line on stilts down by the Customs House, that was an afterthought. And I think it was opened just after Queen Victoria died. And a lot of European cities are like that they had provincial railways that didn't really come into the city and didn't penetrate the city. And they had great big stations, termini, with lots of platforms which take up an awful lot of valuable land. And then they had to retrofit the links between them subsequently, like they just done in London with the Elizabeth line, for example, which cost the earth. It looks like it's been a success in passenger terms, but it was incredibly expensive. So you can blame Queen Victoria, but Dublin doesn't have an urban rail system, and building bits underground because people think we'll all be able to get to the airport rapidly, ignoring the fact that you can get there rapidly at the moment through the Port Tunnel, which is built and paid for. It's an example of the kind of thing that happens with big projects when it's all been driven by politics. And it's very difficult to find anybody. The only people I know who think that Metrolink is questionable are people who live on the Blue Bus route down around. I spent a lot of time down around Bowles Bridge. The Blue Bus comes along, the air coach is on it's called.
Yeah.
It hops into the tunnel. It's out at the airport in 25 minutes. All the people who live around there think that Metrolink is stupid because they use the bus. But Metrolink will be parallel to a pre-existing tunnel, which has no stops in it either, incidentally, which is built and paid for. And it's very difficult to explain to people who live in Rathfarnham. It'd be great if we had an underground railway but it doesn't go from Rathfarnham to the airport, you know? And this idea at retail level, if you like, retail politics level, is, Dublin should be a modern city and we should have an underground railway. The creation of proper urban rail systems in cities like Paris and London has been horrendously expensive, and it's taken 100 years. We've spent the last 50 years pushing Dublin out in the general direction of the Shannon, and it's now a very low density city, and I've never been convinced that it's encouraging for rail-based public transport. There's plenty of possibilities for doing more with the bus system in Dublin, and with bus priority, but we're half-hearted about that.
In terms of joining up that thinking, as you touch on there, in terms of transport, housing and things, what's your assessment of how that's done at the moment as well?
In the UK, there was a couple of policy changes recently that didn't seem to attract a lot of notice here. The UK government has begun to threaten local councils about finances. And as is the case here, local councils are the gatekeepers of land use changes. They are the planning authority. And our 1963 Planning Act was cogged really from the 1948 Town and Country Planning Act in the UK, which gave the gatekeeper role in land use planning to the local councils. And that's the way it's been here. So central government wants to have more housing. Central government thinks houses are too dear and rents are unaffordable and so on. But local councils have all the incentives to listen to residents' associations as they have votes. And the political parties don't really have branches anymore around the suburbs. People won't spend, a Tuesday night every month at a flippin' common meeting listening to people droning on. But they will join the resident association in order to stop something. And there's something that they want to stop most often is we don't want any blocks of apartments around here. And a result is that Dublin has become very low density. It's a Sunbelt city. And the same had been happening in Britain. And the British government has now threatened, and there's going to be a huge row over it. There is already. They've threatened to reduce the central government funding to local authorities unless they zone enough land. They've kind of said there's a new deal now between central government and local government. And if you're going to play this game of everything is zoned rural or it's zoned amenity or some other euphemism, then you're not getting the fiscal transfers from central government that you used to get. And in Ireland, Dublin is quite extraordinary. There are green fields inside the M50 that are absolutely not available for development under every pretext and subterfuge you can imagine.
And in the instance, let's say then, of protected structures, let's say in Marion Square, who do you assign, or who should decide which is actually then a protected structure or not?
Well, it's a good question. The local authorities decide.
But who should, yeah.
And sometimes in Comisiún Pleanála, there was one extraordinary decision recently by somebody on Comisiún Pleanála. They decided that the melange of ready-mix concrete on the way into Terminal 1 in Dublin Airport, there's a spiral entrance into what used to be a rooftop car park over Terminal 1, which hasn't been used because I think the Provos or loyalists or whatever were threatening to blow it up. And it wasn't used for 20 years or whatever. But the old spiral entrance for vehicles to get up to the rooftop car park is still there. And lo and behold, I think it was not Fingal County Council on this occasion, it was on Comisiún Pleanála, decided that it's of architectural merit. It's a heap of ready-mix concrete that some fella, some architect designed it on the back of an envelope. It's just a spiral thing that goes off up. Do you know?
Yes,
the one I mean?
yes.
And the Dublin Airport Authority have been told by Comisiún Pleanála that they cannot knock this down. They want to knock it down to, and it's only about 40 or 50 years there, or less maybe. They want to knock it down to extend Terminal 1. Terminal 1 gets a bit crowded. And there's nowhere. And they always thought they'd be allowed to do this eventually. And now they've suddenly discovered that they have an architectural heirloom on their hands, the middle of the airport.
Are protected structures then kind of, in a sense, another example of poor cost-benefit analysis sometimes?
I know. Well, these things are a matter of taste. The question is whose taste?
Yeah.
And you know, I'm perfectly content at the idea that fine old Georgian vistas in the central areas of Dublin should be preserved. But the protected structure thing, I suspect, has been abused, and that there are people either imposing their tastes on everybody else, like in Comisiún Pleanála. I mean, if you ask the good people of Dublin to select what are the 1,000 most beautiful buildings in Dublin, they would not have chosen the ready-mix concrete spiral ramp out at Terminal 1 at Dublin Airport. They just wouldn't, not as snowballs. But they would. I'd imagine the public would get very upset if some of the old Georgian streets, not just in Dublin, but in Limerick and Cork and elsewhere, if they were to be demolished, you know.
Sort of returning to the economics of it all, would you know, how does private capital fit into all these particularly the big capital projects?
Yeah, I think you need to be careful about that. The government borrows money cheaper than anybody else, provided it keeps its nose clean. And any government that keeps the budget in more or less balance, it doesn't always have to be in surplus. Currently, it appears to be in surplus because there's a lot of transient and temporary tax revenue. That's another story. But any government which is solvent will also be liquid and will be able to borrow cheaper than anybody else. So I'm always a little bit suspicious when people say, "Oh, the most efficient way to finance this is to use private capital." You know, private enterprise companies are not charities, and some of the shifting stuff off balance sheet that went on here. For example, with some of the interurban road projects, they shifted it off balance sheet by getting some firm to borrow the money, and then you give them a toll concession for 20 years and they can collect a few quid off you and me for passing through. I think that was a very foolish approach. Fundamentally because the private companies cannot borrow as cheaply as the government. And they did, and they pass it on. And secondly, you end up with a Mickey Mouse system of road user charging, where there's a toll here, but there's none there, and you fellas go on hooky routes to avoid paying the toll and all this kind of stuff.
Now, that's a case of, let's say, significant private capital being invested, but one thing that occurs is that given the advantages of the state being able to get money more easily and cheaply than private interests, would it be worth considering, let's say, having private investors with the private capital doing more robust cost-benefit analysis? You know, the way that we've talked about how the failings of the state process is
No, I don't agree with that. I think what you can expect with private construction companies, and if you do the bidding properly and so on, they know what they're doing, and you should be able to get the best price if you organize it properly. I think the state should finance these. The state, first of all, should make sure it continues to be in the position to finance these things, which means run the budget carefully and not getting overborrowed, which we did before twice, once in the late 1980s and once with a good bit of help from the banks more recently. So that's a hat trick that shouldn't be completed. But subject to that, the state can borrow cheaper than private companies because it is presumed to have a stronger long-term balance sheet. It has the power of taxation. So the only advantage of getting private companies to bid to build these projects is that they're builders. And you can get that advantage without financing it.
Taking the step back after everything we've discussed in terms of reining in spending and making better decisions, if you were to summarize it, how would we get coherent cost-benefit analyses across all of government?
Have one group of people doing it, publish them, and say that for all large projects above a threshold, it's compulsory. You've no choice. You cannot mark your own homework, and it is boring to read. Not merely the reports that are sometimes done, but then the PR treatment of them that is done not by the accountants or engineers who are commissioned to mark the Quango's homework, but then they go off and get some PR firm to write a press release, which is faithfully reproduced in the daily papers and often on RTE, which says that so-and-so have given the thumbs up to this project. Surprise, surprise. It's hard anyway to get people to spend other people's money carefully. It's one of the great problems with democracy and politics. People will think that there is an exchequer, preferably up in Dublin, which doesn't levy too many taxes around here, and they will send a lorry full of money down here to pay for whatever it is that we'd like to have down here. Mm-hmm. It's hard to get people to spend other people's money carefully. And you need processes, particularly in the capital program, for project selection. And there's one final point I think is worth making. There's a sense in which capital money can be definitively wasted. whereas an awful lot of government current transfers are not really definitively wasted. If the government takes 10 quid off you out of your weekly salary and they give it to me because they think I'm elderly or handicapped or something like that, well, I'll spend it on something half sensible. So the money is not completely wasted. It may be unjust, or you may think there are disincentive effects of taxation and all that sort of stuff. But when the government takes money from one part of the community and shifts it along to somebody else based on their view of what constitutes social justice, it's not a complete waste. But the Bertie Bowl was a complete waste. Mm-hmm. That is taking banknotes and setting fire to them. And in that sense, if you have a big capital program, as we do in Ireland, there is a huge premium to be earned by evaluating it carefully. There used to be a whole host of loss-making state industries in Cork Harbour, including a dockyard that built ships for the Navy and others, and there were subsidies for that. There was a nitrogen plant that turned valuable natural gas into worthless nitrogenous fertilizers, which was exported at a loss. There was Irish Steel, and there was an oil refinery, which the government bought and shouldn't have, my opinion anyway. But a friend of mine used to fly up. There were flights between Dublin and Cork then, and he used to fly up and he'd look out the window, and he used to describe the trip out over Cork Harbour as flying through the middle of the national debt. He says there was an awful lot of dud industries in Cork at that time, and a lot of good ones. There was a lot of heavy unemployment and reluctance to do anything about these loss-making state industries, but they're all gone now.
Thinking about how all that has changed, and considering all the things we've touched on, is there anything about today's political or fiscal context that makes the need for reform more acute, do you think?
I get the impression that there has been, on both the left and the right of Irish politics, a kind of a wholesale surrender to populism in economic policy, and a kind of a denial of trade-offs. The denial of trade-offs, I think, is a classic marker of populism, of the left or right. And there are trade-offs. That's what economics is all about, really. It's about trying to make good trade-off decisions. And when you get all of the politicians, and you can do it, when you have tax revenue rolling in from America, you can kid yourself that this lark is easy. And one form it takes is the denial of trade-offs. I see it in Dublin, just in Dublin traffic. There is wholesale resistance in Dublin to any kind of congestion charging. I don't want to pay that. Or water charge. Water is free. So on. The water charge is a good example. There was a by-election in 2013 or 14, around that time. It was won by an independent guy who's still a TD, who was against paying for water. But everybody else was in favour of it. And he won the by-election. What's
Paul Murphy, I think.
Paul Murphy, yeah. That's right. He won the by-election. And within months, all of the political parties, every one of them, had discovered that water is free. Now, they didn't discover that electricity is free, or that gas is free, or anything else. But they discovered that water is free in 6 months or whatever it was after the by-election, which the free water chap was not expected to win, and he did win it. So politicians are paid for being smarter than the public. And that's the problem with government by opinion poll, that you end up saying that the state is no smarter than the average voter. And I think it was Winston Churchill, when he was retired in the 1950s, somebody asked him to reflect on different forms of government, communism and Nazism, democracy and all that. He said, well, he said, democracy is best. He said, but my faith in democracy is shaken after 5 minutes talking to the average voter. And I think that's the big problem with Irish politics right now, that there is this, how do I put it, surrender to soft options. Mm-hmm. And of course, the softest option of the lot is the Exchequer will pay for it. And you saw that at the back end of last year. There were supplementary estimates and so on for $4 billion in a few months, over and above what had been in the budget. And the Fiscal Council, James Coffey and those guys, have been complaining about all this, and quite rightly. So this is $4 billion on top of whatever the Oireachtas had voted just a few months earlier. And it's just populism. It's not right wing or left wing. It's just a refusal to accept that there are trade-offs. And one trade-off that's that tripped us up in the past is a trade-off between today and tomorrow. Somebody said this once around the time of the second Bord Snip. He said, if you run the country as if it belongs to somebody else, eventually it will.
Is there a way to break out of the cycle as you see it then, of that populism? Because the fundamental basis of it is that it works, that it appeals to people.
Yeah, it does at that level, but it excuses politicians from explaining what they're doing. If you can say, yes, your water is free, we'll abolish water charges, you don't have to explain that actually water is quite expensive. You have to gather it up. You have to build a pipe into everybody's house and maintain them, which, again, you can blame Queen Victoria again, of course, and she built the water system as well. It leaks. But you also have to build a wastewater disposal system. Now, the idea that this is free is insane. You can make the price of it to the individual householder zero, but that doesn't make the cost zero. The costs are now buried in exchequer expenditure somewhere else, and people are paying for it some other way. They're paying for higher VAT or higher income tax or PRSI or something. And that's populism. It's just the denial that there are trade-offs. Trust me, I'll wave a wand and we'll borrow the money, or, as we're doing currently, we'll have great fun with this inflow of corporation tax revenue, which more properly belongs in Washington, D.C., at the Internal Revenue Service, but they have foolishly created this situation where it suits U.S. corporations to pay tax in Ireland rather than in the United States. And not really because it's lower, but because they can, well, it is lower, but that's not really the reason. The reason is that they're not required to consolidate their worldwide profits and account for them in the U.S. And that's something that the U.S. Congress decided to do a long time ago. And it's a pure gift. It's a lotto win every year, as long as it lasts.
Do you think, broadly speaking, there's an institutional memory problem in the Irish state?
A good question. I had the experience that the second time there was a board snip, that was in 2000, early 2009, I think. We're sitting around. The first one was chaired by the then Secretary of the Department of Finance, and that was in the late 80s. And the second one, the Secretary felt that he was going to be up to his eyes bailing out banks and didn't want to chair it. And he was right, actually. In retrospect, a man called David Doyle, who's passed away since, and he kind of didn't want to chair it, so I ended up doing it. And I asked the officials, do you have an aide-memoire from 20 years earlier? Because we'd done this before. We did it a slightly different way. And they went off rooting around, and they didn't really find an aide-memoire. That's institutional memory. You know, when you're finished, anything, any significant policy, innovation, particularly if you know that this is not routine, it's a one-off thing, we're not going to do this again, you really should set up a committee and go off and write a little potted history just for ourselves and stick it in the archives, because somebody will come along in 20 years' time and say, how the hell did we do this the last time?
Do you know whether sort of a report or some overview of the second Bord Snip Nua was done? Do you know if there's a body of knowledge, if it was set up, 30 years hence or something?
Yeah.
If there's...
it could be sooner than that.
Well, yeah, well...
I don't think so, actually.
Well, would there be any portable lessons then in the event that in a few years' time there's something set up?
These situations are all a bit different. But for any big government department that has to do a high-profile exercise of this kind for a while, and won't be doing it again for a long while, I think there should be always a memo to files. What have we learned about this? Did we get the right guys to do it? Did we structure it the right way? Did we get it done quickly enough? Did we clarify with the minister what he really wanted properly in advance? All those kinds of things. And they do. Now, I don't want to give anybody the impression that Irish government departments never do that. They do it, but it doesn't seem to be very systematic. And there's kind of scraps and bits of things here and there.
But would there be any particular lessons if you were to be doing a one-page memo on it yourself on the second Bord Snip Nua from around the time?
The central decision that was taken then was that there was a rough idea when the second Bord Snip was set up. There was a rough idea of the scale of the economies in current spending that was needed. And we recommended a huge multiple of that figure. The thinking being there were lots of bodies buried all over the place, and the vote officers in the Department of Finance knew an awful lot about what was going on in different spending departments. And we kind of thought it's up to the government. That these are very political decisions. And there's no point, for example, if you thought we need to cut out 500 million or whatever, more maybe, then we'll just recommend 500 million. That's no good to politicians. So we recommended, I've forgotten the figures now.
5.2 billion.
Yeah, which was a large multiple of what needed to be done. what we thought needed to be done. In fact, so the government went off and said, well, we're not doing that and we're not doing that, but we will do this. And they did a few things that we hadn't recommended as it happened. And they rejected a few of the things out of hand and so on. I think that was an approach worth thinking about, which is not what was done the first time back in the late 80s.
Mm-hmm.
But I was reminded the other day, I was listening to a program on the BBC about Keir Starmer and his Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, and the question whether they should have done a bit differently last summer. That's the summer of 2024 when they won the election, wasn't it? It was
2024, yeah, 2 summers. Yeah.
They won the election and they won a big majority, bigger than their vote share would have justified. And I was just thinking, in 1988 or 87, Charlie Haughey won the general election, having railed against the meanness and stinginess of the coalition, which had got the public finances into trouble. They borrowed an awful lot of money. And he then won the election, and he immediately marched off down to the Department of Finance, which was all of 50 yards down the road from the Taoiseach's office. And he brought about 20 journalists with him and TV cameras and all the rest. Went into the Department of Finance, having promised everything is going to be great, won the election, went in to inspect the books with whose contents he was fully familiar. And he came out an hour later, a different colour, and gazed into the cameras, said that all the money is gone. Previous share have vaporised all the money. And I was just thinking that that's exactly what Keir Starmer should have done in the summer of 2024. And instead, they came in with a huge majority, haven't been out of office for a long time. And the outgoing Tory government was unpopular anyway, had not done well in the election. They should have gone in and blamed him, said, I've inspected the books. He should have got out an old video of his performance in Marion Street that day. Now, I'm not saying it would have worked, but it would have worked better than what they did, which was to promise that we will not cut health and we'll not cut this, that, and the other, and we won't put up VAT and we won't put up income tax, and 2 and 2 is equal to 5. No.
The communications element matters. A lot of
Well, yeah, but it would have been a gamble.
Yeah.
But what they did was a gamble. I mean, what they actually did in Britain was a bigger gamble.
Mm-hmm.
They said we will defend all the big areas of spending. Health is huge area of spending, and we're not going to put up the taxes that really raise money. They put up a few Mickey Mouse taxes. Don't raise very much money. So, but how he the theatrics were terrific of marching into the Department of Finance. He was an accountant by profession.
Mm-hmm.
He knew exactly what the story was, but he went in, came out, and I don't know if he bought a makeup fella in with him, but he was a whiter shade when he came out.
The one final question that we ask quite a few people is, what advice would you give to someone seeking to improve how Ireland selects or delivers public projects?
Oh, I think dust off the public spending code and implement it.
But for individuals, would there be anything for an individual man on the street sort of thing? Is there anything that you'd see that, advice to them that they could do?
Be very choosy who you vote for. I got very bothered about the
And that brings us to an end of this episode of Memo to File. Thanks to Colm McCarthy for joining us, and thank you for listening. The archive clip of former Taoiseach Charles Haughey was from the RTE Archives, and audio engineering of this episode was supported by Ophonic.com. Thanks as well to the National University of Ireland for facilitating this interview in the Phelan Room. A reminder that we will soon be recording a Memo to File review. We would love to hear from you, so please do email us at memotofilepodcast@gmail.com. Next Thursday, we'll be considering the establishment of the Criminal Assets Bureau with retired Detective Chief Superintendent Pat Byrne. See you then.